We're recording now, so we're ready to start. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Catalina Lopez, and I am the director of the Aquatic Animal Alliance. And I will be moderating this great panel today, which is called Working with Global Certifiers. And in this panel, you will hear from experts from global certification schemes and also experts in creating benchmarks. So some housekeeping reminders for the attendees. The audience is muted upon entry and cameras are off. You can post your questions in the Q&A box and we will answer your questions at the end of the session. Every session will be recorded and posted on YouTube after the conference. And we expect respectful and productive discussions, and we have zero tolerance for harassment or discrimination of any kind. The sessions will be 45 minutes, and we have 4 wonderful panelists that I will introduce now. So we have with us today Sean Black, who is Senior Scientific Officer for Aquaculture within the Farm Animals Department at the RSPCA in the UK. We have Mario Passoni, who is the Head of Conservation and Awareness Project at Friend of the Sea and Friend of the Earth. Arthur Fuest, Standards Innovation Manager at the Soil Association, and Claire Howard, Director at Crustacean Compassion. So welcome all. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we're very excited to hear from you. So yeah, I'll pass it over to you, Sean. I think you're muted.
Yes, classic. Thank you very much, Catalina. Thank you. I will just share my screen and hopefully this will hopefully get to go. So, is that okay?
Yes, we see a little kind of square. That's better. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Okay, yeah, so I'm the Senior Scientific Officer for Aquaculture at the RSPCA, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the work that we do relating to aquatic animal welfare. So a bit of background to start. The RSPCA is the world's oldest animal welfare charity, and in fact in 2024 will be 200 years old. And the main goal of the charity is to improve the welfare of as many animals as possible, from pets to wildlife to farm animals and to animals in science. So it's every animal in England and Wales, and also some in Scotland. Particularly the Farm Animals Department where I work, we aim to improve the lives of as many farm animals as possible, and we primarily do that through the development of farmed animal welfare standards. And in the 2021 to 2030 RSPCA strategy, it is our stated ambition that over 50% of UK farm animals should be reared to these higher welfare standards, as well as encouraging people to eat less, but eat better. So eat less meat, dairy, fish and eggs, but when they do eat it, that they eat it from a higher quality product. On the RSPCA welfare standards in particular, we have 12 standards that cover all the main farmed animals in the UK. And as you can see, we have 2 that are specific for fish, and that is for Atlantic salmon and rainbow trout. And those are what I'm going to focus on most of today. The welfare standards are primarily used by RSPCA Assured, which is the farm assurance scheme for the RSPCA. It is a completely separate charity from the RSPCA. It has its own board, has its own funding stream, and it has its own staff. But what they do is they assure farms to our own welfare standards. So the RSPCA, that's where I am positioned. We develop the welfare standards, and then RSPCA Assured will administer and market the scheme and also perform the assessments on a yearly basis for every farm. A little bit about how RSPCA Assured work when we talk about the certifier here. As I said, it's the only assurance scheme dedicated to farm animal welfare in the UK, and it assesses and approves farms that meet all the applicable welfare standards. but it also covers other aspects of the life cycle for farm animals. So for fish, it also covers hauliers, so that can be road transport or wellboats, but also abattoirs as well. We've heard a lot in earlier presentations about slaughter facilities, so we do also certify those facilities as well. Membership is subject to an annual membership fee, and that's completely reinvested back into staff and to technology. And also membership is subject to completing a successful annual assessment. RSPCA Assured has a dedicated and experienced team of assessors, which are stationed throughout the UK, and they carry out on-site inspections. Particularly for fish, when they're on site, we also, as well as looking at data and records, the assessors do try to get out to actually see the fish as well. So they are getting a hands-on look at what's going on a farm at the same time. So a little bit about what we've achieved for animal welfare, particularly for fish welfare, sorry. So as we heard again in the previous panel, there's no underlying welfare legislation in the UK for fish. So the presence of the standards for salmon and for trout since the late 90s, early 2000s has significantly improved the welfare of both farm salmon and farm trout in the UK. Without the standards, it's tough to say what the actual landscape would look like. So it's really been a stand-in in place of legislation. Our standards are dedicated to salmon and trout. They're not overarching, so they have a much more increased impact on what they can do, and they're also dedicated. For example, for Atlantic salmon, we have dedicated standards for freshwater and for seawater. So it's not by any means overarching. It's very specific about where we target in order to make the biggest impact. The scheme for both salmon and trout here in the UK has a very large market share, but also very large support from retailers, academics, and other groups. We recognise the work that we do and the benefits that it brings. So while the scheme is very UK centric, this RSPCA Assured doesn't certify farms outside of the UK. The standards themselves can be used worldwide. So they've been used to aid the setup of other standards, other codes of good practice, but also other assurance schemes. So the focus is primarily in the UK, but our influence can be and is global. We do a lot more work as RSPCA across the world. When it comes to our work with advocacy groups, which is really quite important as well, when we're going through the standards development process, we engage with a very large range of stakeholders, from producers and farmers, all the way through academics, vets, welfare experts, transport companies, equipment manufacturers, governments, governmental bodies, NGOs, some of who are on this call as well, and other certification bodies. So we do all of this with the intention of improving fish welfare. And with advocacy groups, we really see the benefit being that we are using, or we try to bridge the gap between industry and what's happening on the ground and what people are wanting to do and what they believe in. So because we're almost in the middle, we are able to bridge the gap where it exists. So we work with advocacy groups to identify areas for improvement, and then what that improvement would look like. Obviously, a big one at the moment is around the what does environmental enrichment look like in farm salmon and farm trout. This is a brand new area that a lot of advocacy groups are talking about. So we're looking at what does that look like and how can we implement it. And then we can also take back to these groups, what is the industry doing? So we act as a nice bridge. So it works really well, because from our point of view, in order to make the biggest difference, we all have to work together in some way in order to achieve the very best for fish welfare, because that's what our end ambition is. And just to finish, a little bit about what the future looks like in terms of what we're doing for fish welfare. So the next step for us is to push towards a life worth living, and what is positive welfare for fish. It's something we've stressed a lot for our other species that we cover by the welfare standards, but it's very new for salmon and trout. So what does that look like? So we're looking at current research, but also what are the gaps in knowledge? What can we do to help? We also continue to face the challenges that do continue to exist for both salmon and trout, but also what is on the horizon. Climate change is effect. We see in the last 2 or 3 years, we see a big impact on salmon and trout here in the UK. So what does the standards need to do in order to help with that? And we also help to drive forward welfare improvements in other areas. We heard earlier about the drive for better welfare legislation in the UK. That's something that we try to help with where we can as well. We help with research projects, what new tools coming onto the market, like artificial intelligence. And also we do a lot of information and best practice sharing. So just like this event here, and other events that I've attended throughout the year. So we do a lot to try and push forward aquatic animal welfare when it comes to farmed fish. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope that was interesting, and I'm more than happy to take some questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Sean. That was great. And a lot of things resonated with me a lot, as you know, from our previous conversations, but definitely, you know, giving the fish lives worth living is part of our mission. And we're very excited that this is entering more into the certifier space. So looking forward to working with you more in that sense. Okay, let's pass it over to Mario. Are you there?
Of course.
Hello.
Hello, and hello, Sean. It's a pleasure to see you again. Okay, yeah, let me share my screen. Allora. Okay, just let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, so nice to meet you, everybody. My name is Mario Passoni, and I work at Friend of the Sea since 2018. In the past, I was dealing mainly with the developing of certification standards of sustainability. Now I'm leading mainly our conservation awareness projects, but at the same time, I'm still leading the fish welfare project that we have at Friend of the Sea. So Friend of the Sea, as Friend of the Earth, belongs to the World Sustainability Organization, that is our main society. Friend of the Sea is a project of the World Sustainability Organization and deals mainly with the certification of products coming from fisheries and aquaculture. And Friend of the Earth is a kind of sister that is mainly dealing with the certification of products from agriculture and farming. In addition, as you have understood, we have also several conservation awareness projects. But today I would like to explain you what we have done in the last years about fish welfare in aquaculture. Basically, we had a 3 years project with some researchers from Switzerland, the Fair Fish team. And with their help, we have developed some criteria of sustainability in aquaculture farms. So there was, and there is, a scientific approach behind the development of these standards of certification. So we have created 24 different standards of certification, species specific. So on the right side of the screen, you can see the list of the species. I'm not going to read all the species, but yeah, then if you want to know more about them, just ask. How did it work? Basically, we started by contacting our certified farms. Then we sent the researcher from a Fair Fish team to make a first visit in order to collect data about their level of welfare in aquaculture operation. After that, there was they created a report, and they sent the report to the aquaculture farm with a list of improvement. And after 6 to 9 months later, they got back visit the farms for a second visit and see if they applied the suggestions. What was nice is that we assessed almost 50 aquaculture farms, and some of them, they started to apply the suggestions. So based on the information we got from them, we created the requirements of the standard of certification. So how to get certified? First of all, the certification is open to all the farms around the world. So it's a voluntary certification. Our requirements are listed on 3 levels: essential, important, and recommendation, based on the level and also the feasibility of the requirements itself. So once we applied, a third-party auditor is going to make the audit, the assessment of the requirements. And if the aquaculture farm respect the 100% of the essential and important requirements, they can get the certification. If they do not respect all the requirements immediately, while there is the first audit, we give time to them to improve and to get in alignment with these requirements. And this is fundamental for us. I mean, because we do not audit or certify perfect aquaculture farms or fisheries in general. So our work is to let improve as much as possible. So once they respect all the essential important requirements, they get the certification and the use of our logo that lasts 3 years. And within 12 months from the initial audit, they need to make a surveillance audit. Okay, so coming back to the requirements of the fish well aquaculture standard, we have a series of paragraph sections, let's say. First of all, the standard is divided into 2 main sections: hatchery and on-growing, based on the production system of the aquaculture farm. And then on the right, you can see the list of sections that we want to investigate on. So on captive environment, water, animal health and animal welfare, feeding, and so on. So in total, we have for each standard around an average of 150 requirements. So it's quite complicated, but it's necessary because all these subjects are important in terms of welfare. Here, you can see an example of our requirements. So for the hatchery, the captive environment, there is the number of requirements, what we require. So for example, production units should provide horizontal and vertical withdrawal space, optimizing fish welfare conditions regarding special constraints. The level of this requirement is important. It means that if they do not respect immediately the requirement, they have up to 12 months to get in compliance. And then some parameters information and the comments, the column for the comments of the auditor. So this is about our fish welfare project in aquaculture farms. You have to know that now we have started a brand new project. It started 1 year ago, more or less. And this project is called the Care Fish Catch Project and is focused on fisheries. So we would love to apply more or less the same criteria to fisheries, but it's so much more difficult, honestly, so much more difficult. So we are adapting the project to fisheries, and we are starting to focus on the fishing method first to develop the right requirement. This project will last at least 4 years, but probably 5. So there is a lot of work, but we all think that it's fundamental, is something that has to be done, and will be not easy at the beginning because coming back to the aquaculture farms, they need to get involved and to understand what we require. And for some of them will be probably also an investment, even in terms of money, in order to buy the right equipment, for example, for slaughtering and so on. But we really, really care about this project, and we want to be successful as much as possible. So thank you very much for following, and I'll wait for your question at the end.
Thank you so much, Mario. That was very interesting. I think it's very useful for the audience to see how the certification process works. I think those are some questions that we get sometimes from stakeholders. And we're very excited about your fisheries project because, as you say, there's such a huge gap in that space in terms of welfare. And we're, looking forward to seeing the results of your work. All right, Arthur, do you want to go ahead?
Well, thanks, everyone. I'll just share my screen. Can you see everything?
Not yet. There it is.
Perfect. Bear with me a second.
Looks great.
Brilliant. So my name is Arthur and I work at the Soil Association, one of the largest organic organisations in the UK. We certify organic aquaculture in the UK, but we also work with other organic organisations across the world and have a sort of global influence there. I'll give a short introduction into organic production, the what, the why, the how, and probably in that order, and how this relates to driving best practice in animal welfare. And importantly, how charities and welfare groups can best collaborate with standard setters and certifiers. So what is organic and why is a charity called the Soil Association involved in aquaculture? For over 75 years, the Soil Association has fostered a movement of farmers, food producers and citizens putting a brake on intensive aquaculture and encouraging food production that is in line with natural systems. As you can see from our agreed definition, the health of ecosystems and people wouldn't be possible without the health of aquatic systems, and the interconnectedness of aquatic production and terrestrial farming is increasingly recognized. And integral to the definition of organic is the good quality of life for all involved, and the production of organic fish is no different. In order to develop standards, organic needs to be anchored by a set of core principles, and organic aquaculture is no different. Our guiding lights are the principles of ecology, health, fairness, and care. Our standards then need to be evidence-based and developed using the best available scientific evidence, and with a strong focus on the precautionary principle. A commitment to animal welfare for both farmed and wild fish are embedded within these principles. But for today, I'll just be talking about farm fish. So from principles to practice, our standards provide species-specific rules, from restrictions and common mutilations to providing the right farm habitat. Our standards also stipulate strong rules on slaughter, and it's been great to hear the discussions in this conference today on slaughter. And I'll speak a bit more about that in a moment. Organic was initially developed as a private standard between NGOs, the industry, and the organic community. And these standards are now written into law in the UK and across the world. And we currently certify around 12 different species, but in the UK, production is mostly focused on Atlantic salmon and bivalves. So looking a little bit more closely at the welfare requirements and meeting the needs of individual species, we certify right the way through the production system from egg to slaughter. And crucially, this is not just about farm production. We zoom out a bit and take a slightly wider scale focus on the development and origin of stock pushing to ensure that that the stock that are actually farmed are suitable for the conditions they're being farmed in, and there's a focus on health and prevention of disease. Before a farm can be certified, we pay strict attention to the site location. We must demonstrate that their location and system design meet the needs of the animals. This includes key areas like stocking densities and water quality. And crucially, slaughter. The acknowledgement of fish as sentient animals capable of suffering has been accepted for a long time in the organic community, and this is reflected in our standards, particularly at slaughter. And I think this is a good example of how a relatively small sector, such as organics, can drive change in the rest of the industry. In Scotland, where we're focused, a lot of the other certifiers and NGOs are working in collaboration with us. And we're currently engaged with other welfare organisations to make sure that the Animal Welfare Committee's upcoming recommendations on slaughter are written into law. So it's all very well having lofty standards, but if they can't be verified in the field or pond, then there's not a lot of point. So organic certification offers a robust and legally enforced system which to do this. We have an experienced inspector team, and it's a requirement by law that sites are certified, inspected rather, once a year, with the occasional unannounced inspection as well. Detailed records and objective evidence must be provided, and this fills in the gaps in between inspections so that we get a full picture of what's happening on site. We're very keen that our aquaculture producers develop comprehensive health plans, and I know the RSPCA are also very keen on this as well. And we make a continual effort to make sure that these plans are kept live and are useful. So the development of organic standards for fish is always a work in progress. The standards reflect a floor and not a ceiling. And by closing the gap between our standards and principles, we can raise that floor up. This is especially important at the moment, as especially important in Europe rather, as the European government have made a commitment to significantly increase the amount of organic production. So we need to make sure that the organic principles are embedded within that growth. Here in the UK, we're looking to our government to provide a similar ambition, and it looks likely that Scotland may do this, but in England, things are far less certain. Importantly, our standards are not created in isolation. They are nested in the work done by the welfare research community and academics, and we engage with the community directly through public consultations and through working groups that we operate. I strongly encourage anybody interested to get in contact and engage with us through those groups. And it's also great to attend conferences like this where we can learn from the community. Just finally, a little note on our upcoming standards review for the end of this year and moving into 2023. We're looking to better develop standards on cleaner fish, some of the environmental impacts from farm location, feed ingredients, and specific species welfare requirements. And finally, I just thought I'd add a little note that at the Soil Association, we believe that engagement is key, and citizens engaged in their food communities change practice and not consumers. It's often discussed in public discourse that it's consumer action that drives change, but we believe that only citizens truly engaged with their food systems will be able to do this. Thank you very much. And if you'd like to contact me, I'd be more than welcome. And there's a link to our standards.
Thank you so much, Arthur, for that intervention. That was really interesting. And I really love how Soil Association kind of highlights the connection between these systems that, have animals at the base with the surrounding ecosystems and communities, because they're definitely tied together and can't be separated. Great. So maybe if you can stop sharing your screen, Arthur, so we can move on to Claire.
Sorry, I lost the, you're back.
It happens. Claire, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Please take it away.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes, looks perfect.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay, so hello everybody. I'm Claire Howard. I'm Director at Crustacean Compassion, and today I'll be introducing our business benchmark for decapod crustacean welfare. I'm sure many of you will already be familiar with decapod crustaceans, but for anyone who's new to this area, in contrast to the finfish that have just been discussed by my fellow panelists, decapod crustaceans are an order of 10-legged, predominantly aquatic animals, including crabs, lobsters, and prawns. A bit of background: Crustacean Compassion was established in 2016 and is a campaigning organisation focused exclusively on decapod welfare, primarily through policy change, engagement with industry, and promoting the humane treatment of what we believe are truly fascinating animals. So since last year's ALI conference, the London School of Economics and Political Science published the findings of their review into the evidence of sentience for decapods and cephalopods. Their central recommendation was that all decapods should be protected in animal welfare legislation as sentient animals. This was followed by the inclusion of decapods within the UK Animal Sentience Act in April this year, providing legal recognition of decapod sentience for the first time. So now they're recognised as sentient, what next? I'm going to focus on our engagement with industry today. Whilst we do have extensive plans for policy work, we don't have enough time to cover all of it. Most specifically, I'll be talking about our business benchmark, which assesses decapod welfare within the food industry. The benchmark will be launching in early 2023, so I won't cover the findings today, but will instead give an insight into how and why we've been developing it and how we intend to use it. One of the challenges we repeatedly face is the lack of data for this previously uncounted group of animals. As Sherlock Holmes so aptly put it, without clay we cannot make bricks. Therefore, one of the key functions of this first iteration of the benchmark is to provide a baseline of decapod welfare within the industry. What are they currently doing and how are they doing it? What policies currently exist and what good practice or the beginnings of good practice is already being implemented and by which companies? How are they reporting on these areas? And alongside all of this, we'll also be looking at which areas may prove especially challenging or may need additional focus to improve welfare outcomes. So what was our approach? The acceptance that this is an immature issue for industry and not something they have necessarily needed to consider before has helped to shape our approach for the first version of this benchmark. We'll be assessing 30 companies which reflect the issues faced by decapods from sea to plate, incorporating capture, storage, transport, handling, mutilations, and of course, slaughter. We've been working with a specialist company, Kronos Sustainability, since the beginning of the year to develop questions that cover all of these areas. Once we had the first draft of the benchmark, which took a little while to get because, as we mentioned, it's a new area entirely, so we were starting from point zero. Once we had that first draft, we set up one-to-one meetings with key stakeholders, companies, industry associations, and some aquatic animal NGOs to explain what the benchmark was and requesting really honest feedback on every aspect. We also put it online for public consultations, pushing this to our networks. We did have really good engagement levels and initial response from industry, with comments confirming that this sort of information and tool was much needed, though there were concerns about how it would be used. As a result of the feedback on the benchmark, several questions had wording and or weightings altered, and a couple of companies included in the initial benchmark were swapped out for alternates. The benchmarking is currently underway, with the initial profiles and scores that have been generated are now with the companies as they're given an opportunity to provide additional information that may not currently be publicly accessible. So this first version of the benchmark is going to be a little different in recognition that this has been an emerging issue across the food industry. There's a greater emphasis on reporting in this first benchmark than there will be in future years. As mentioned, the bar is currently low for decapod welfare within the sector, so the scoring of questions are weighted a little more towards reporting to encourage and acknowledge the importance of publicly stating welfare-related information, both for fellow industry and also for consumers. Whilst we don't anticipate especially high scores in the first year, we are looking for any practices that are better to show what is possible within the industry and to begin to identify some industry champions. Transparency will also be an important part of the benchmark in the future, but the first version will be anonymised, with the launch report providing an analysis of themes and trends across different parts of the industry, instead of highlighting the exact scores for each company. The low standards of welfare currently experienced by decapods are widely known and accepted. So the focus in the first year will be to provide companies with an individual breakdown of how they scored and engage with them to support improving those scores over the next year through positive changes. So a little more about the benchmark itself and what it covers. The questions within the benchmark fall into 4 categories that you can see on the screen here. An example question from the management commitment and policy is, does the company have a clear position on the avoidance of non-therapeutic mutilation of decapod crustaceans? And for the purposes of this question, we define non-therapeutic to mean that it doesn't have a direct welfare benefit for the animal. And it includes procedures such as eye stalk ablation, nicking and declawing. A second example, this time from governance and management, is, has the company assigned management responsibility for the welfare of decapod crustaceans to an individual or specified committee? This captures the importance that there is accountability within companies on this issue, that it doesn't become a tick box exercise. In the interest of time, I won't go through every question, as there are 22, but do contact me if you'd like any further information. So why did we decide on a benchmark? Crustacean Compassion identified the need for a tool that could provide baseline data for decapods within the food industry, a tool that would be useful for engagement so that businesses could understand the expectations that we had of them, and the way that we could then support and engage with companies to help them make those changes. We wanted something that would drive reporting across industry to encourage ownership within the sector and to promote investment in welfare from the sector. We also wanted to increase transparency to help consumers to make informed decisions, but also to help higher welfare being viewed as a competitive advantage within the industry. And we also wanted to drive changes that led to improved welfare outcomes for decapods in the food industry. That is just because that is laughter is by no means least. It is one of the most important aspects of this at all times for us. We're confident that creating the first benchmark for decapod welfare will help us to achieve these objectives. And we really look forward in seeing how this changes over the coming years. And finally, the reason that we're all here, impact for animals. While the initial version of the benchmark will be focused on countries with a link to the UK, that decision's been made given the incentive that the Sentience Act has provided to recognise and improve the welfare of these animals. Industry in the UK is aware that change is coming, so it made sense for us to start here. However, some of the companies that we've chosen also operate internationally, and it's also envisaged that the benchmark will expand in future versions to include a wider geographic scope. Thank you very much. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop me a line at this email, but thanks very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Claire. We're very excited about this tool. I think, like you say, it's so useful to kind of show what exists in the industry, and there's so much unknown about crustaceans at this point. So I think your benchmark will guide the work of many from now on in terms of crustacean welfare. So we have a few minutes for questions, which is great. So let's see, maybe I can ask you all about this, and Arthur already touched on this, so I already know he's gonna push back to this issue. But how do you all think that consumers affect, the work of certifiers? Do they care about animal welfare, or what are those aspects that are pushing for the industry to move towards animal welfare friendly practices? So maybe we can start with Mario.
Of course, it's a very good question. It's something that we thought about, and we are working on a communication strategy in order to, highlight this point. I think most of the consumers don't know about it, and that's why we should highlight this point that is so much important. If I think 10 years ago, almost no one was thinking about sustainability, but now sustainability is everywhere, is mentioned everywhere. So we should start to push on it as much as possible in order to let consumers understand how it's important, that is important has a sustainability and maybe even a little bit more, by my point of view.
Yeah, you're very right. I think sustainability has become like a buzzword that nobody ever really understands anymore. But hopefully, animal welfare, we can still like center the conversation around the animals. Claire, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting from our perspective with decapods, because they are a bit of the new kid on the block, so to speak. Still, that actually for consumers who have them, it's something that many of them have been trying to wrap their heads around it. That's what we're certainly told, and what we've kind of found so far is that people have been looking for reasons and ways to do things better for a while. So hence people putting them in the freezer, putting a live lobster in the freezer before they boil it, because they think that it's more humane. So people are trying to do the right thing often. They just don't necessarily know what that is. So I do think that there is a definite role that certifiers can help to do that. I think consumer overwhelm is the biggest risk, where people are just have so many messages and so many things they're trying to do the right thing on, that I think it can sometimes just become white noise. So I think that's the key aspect then, is to kind of help to make sure that we don't overwhelm them even further, and to make sure that we're really clear with what we're asking. And I think that kind of comes into labeling as much as anything else then, so that people understand what the certifications actually mean, and they understand what different certifiers mean and what they're kind of doing, so it helps them to make an informed choice.
Yeah, you're so right. I think consumers are so bombarded by information on how they can improve in many aspects of their lives. So I think making it as easy as possible for them to understand is the best way to go. Sean, any thoughts on this?
Not kind of beyond what everyone else has already said. Certainly for us, we see a kind of mix of consumer interest in what they purchase, what they look for, but at the same time, there's a lot of discussions around what is proper labeling. There's obviously a lot of consultations going on in the UK about labeling for farm species, which isn't including fish at the moment. But also we do see, as Arthur said, it's about citizens, what happens, what interests them, what do they want to see improved. So it's a mix of both. And for us, it's trying to take all the feedback we can from both, and where can we make what's going to make the biggest difference at the end of the day, and then what is our role to inform people. If you choose one of the number of labels out there, what are you actually getting? I think that's really important, that there's kind of clarity about what is going on, and what each standard certification stands for. So you've got to be really clear. I think, as Claire said, they could be overwhelmed, so you've got to be very clear about what are the big differences between each certification and what are people buying when they do buy fish.
Yeah, I think, when we have these conversations, I think sometimes the aspect that we're missing is communications, because we focus so much on the science and on the campaigns, but not actually explaining why we're doing this and what does it mean for you in your everyday life as an individual. So I do think that we should work together better for people to understand the role of certifiers and how they can actually improve the lives of the animals. So I left you for last, Arthur, because I know you have the counter argument, and I love that. Go ahead.
Well, I think my comment at the end was a little bit flippant, and it was maybe deliberately flippant. I think my main point was that people drive change, and it needs to be more at a more holistic point than just at the checkout in the supermarket. And I think, as Claire and Mario and Sean have all alluded to, we're bombarded by choice, and it's very confusing. And I think, as you said, comms is really important. And if we embed that within communities in that general discussion, then it doesn't have to be right at the last minute when you are a consumer. It's about engaging people right across their everyday lives. And I think people do care if they are asked, and there's a bit of bias when you are directly asked about these things. And of course, you're going to respond that you care a lot about welfare, but there are pressures when you're actually purchasing things. So the point where you can make change is not necessarily when you're buying it, although that obviously does affect change a lot as well.
I think it's also the level of nuance that you go into with this as well. I think sometimes people just want the absolute top line. They just want to, they don't necessarily need to know the exact reasons why something is good or why something is bad. They almost just want to know, okay, if I'm going to go, if I have a choice of two shops, which one's own brand is likely to be slightly better than the other? And it can be that kind of level of top line that people are looking for. So I think it's about making sure that we don't give them too much, but making sure that they do have enough that if they do want to make that more refined decision, because often the devil is in the detail with this stuff, but actually we do kind of walk that line quite carefully.
Yeah, that's very true. And also kind of creating those baseline standards where we are comfortable with the welfare conditions, but that still the consumer has choices depending on other things, the packaging or the branding or, you know, all those things that influence the psychology of purchasing choices. Maybe I'll take a couple more minutes since we are going on a longer break to ask a final questions. So, how do your certification standards and your benchmark to Claire, since this is going to be kind of a progressive benchmark, how do you all stay updated in the latest technology, in the latest research, and how do you incorporate it usually to the standards? So maybe let's start with you, Arthur, this time.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, I mean, one of the crucial ways of staying updated is through engagement with conferences such as this, but we have a sort of formalized way of making sure that we're incorporating the views of our stakeholders and the most up-to-date science within the welfare community, and that's through public consultations and through expert working groups, of which they're open applications, and I invite anybody that feels that they want to apply. But then, you know, there's a much softer way of doing it as well through networking and stakeholder management and making sure that we're having the right conversations and being open. Of course, also hiring expert staff, people that are much better at these things than me.
Yes, that is definitely key. We have our staff senior scientist, Tessa, who does all that great work for us. And then we say smart things because of her. So I understand. Sean, do you have anything to add?
No, from our point of view, it's very similar. You know, we have for each of our standards, we have a technical advisory group. We lean on them for a lot of what's happening on the ground. But then we also have a lot of communication with other stakeholders through our own networking or from our reputation as well. If people want to, we get a lot of requests. People are thinking, oh, we'd like to bring something into the UK aquaculture scene. They'll come to the RSPCA. So we're very lucky in that aspect, but also through conferences, just general networking. I had the pleasure of meeting everyone on this panel, you know, in various ways, but it's all kind of feeding into the same thing because everyone's got a different opinion. So it's really good to hear what everybody else is thinking. So that's kind of where we get our main thing from, but also just sit and read a lot of papers and, you know, see what's out there, what's happening, and what can be brought across to the UK. So that's what we do a lot of. In particular, I spend quite a lot of my time doing that.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Like you just have to keep reading and talking to academics and also kind of trying to fill in the gaps of research. You know, what don't we know and do we need to know and who can carry out that research? I think that's always an interesting conversation to have. Mario, any thoughts?
Yeah, before we used to update our standards, we make a long search looking for the best scientific evidence available. And then once we update our standards or we create new standards, then there is an help from our technical committee, advisory board members, and from stakeholders during the 60 days public consultation. So it's a very long process. It's not easy to be updated every time, so we need the help of everybody for this kind of things.
Yeah, that's so important, like making sure that everyone kind of has a voice, and you can learn different things from different stakeholders that maybe you weren't thinking because you're in your own bubble. That sometimes helps you kind of think out of the box. Claire, any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, just seconding what the other panelists have said about just generally keeping up to date in terms of new papers that come out and kind of new research that's being done. I think for our issue in particular, because it's a relatively new one, or certainly one that there's needing to be a lot more specifics when it comes to the industry application of welfare. Certainly, it's an area where we have a lot of questions, and the industry equally have those questions. So from my perspective, it's about making sure that we kind of balance the difference between acting now so that we're not waiting to have all of the questions and absolutely all the data in place, but equally making sure that we have the decisions and the asks that we're making, particularly of industry, that we're then not moving the goalposts too suddenly. Because actually, if we're asking companies to invest in a particular methodology, and we need to be confident in that, and so we need to make sure that the initial asks we're doing, they might be tweaked and refined and changed, but they're unlikely to have major swerves, as far as we can, certainly. I think furthermore, we also, one of the questions in the benchmark is encouraging, and the aim of it is to encourage industry to actually own some of the research and development themselves. That industry is doing this day in, day out. They are in many ways the experts of what they need to achieve from the services or the kind of the procedures that they're doing. So actually getting industry to contribute to this and to be in some ways the leaders in certain aspects of it. So what will work and meet the welfare requirements whilst also meeting the industry requirements. And I think that's something that I'm quite excited to see how those two things combine more in the future, really.
Can I just come on the back of that, Katarina? I just want to echo what Claire was saying, and it sort of mirrors our own experience, especially in some of our terrestrial systems that we certify, that farmer-led research really gets to the core of what's needed quite fast. And often we sort of don't want to make perfect the enemy of the good. And we want to make sure that our work is embedded within actual systems. And engaging with farmers on the ground is one of the best ways of doing this. And we're keen to be doing this more in aquaculture.
Yeah, that's so true. And, I really like the bridge that certifiers kind of create between kind of stakeholders like NGOs and farmers and the industry, because sometimes farmers can be a little hesitant to work with NGOs, but they trust the certifiers and kind of understand why you guys are telling them to do what you're telling them to do. So I think that's always why we kind of enjoy a lot working with certifiers, and you can be that bridge. All right, well, I think we went a little over time, so sorry for taking a few more minutes of your time. Thank you so much, Claire, Sean, Arthur, Mario. It was great chatting with you. We all learned a lot today. Just a reminder that we're asking you to kind of share information on our participation at COP27 to kind of boost the conversation on the connection of animal welfare, sustainability, and climate change. So please share in your networks. And up next, we have a 23-minute break. So please fuel up and get some rest. And up next, we have at 12:30 East, a panel where you will hear about best practices on how to pitch for funding to philanthropists. So it's really interesting for organizations that are looking for funding in this space. So thank you everyone again, and hopefully I'll see you in a bit.